Good morning. The Committee on Parole is reconvening. Time is 9:25. Would the offender please state your name and your Department of Corrections ID?
My name is Jody Craig, and my DOC number is 92113.
Good morning. The Committee on Parole is reconvening. Time is. We're getting feedback. Okay. Would everybody please mute your mics? Okay. Mr. Craig, my name is Alvin Roche. To my left is Mr. P. Freeman, and to my right is Mrs. Bonnie Jackson. We'll compose your parole panel this morning. Let me explain the process to you. I will read some information into the record. Once that information is in the record, we'll conduct a parole interview with you. At the appropriate time, we'll allow the warden to make comments, and then we'll let the persons in support of your early release make their statements. Speaking will be Mr. Carrot Myers of the Louisiana Parole Project, and Mr. Andrew Huntley, who will not be speaking, and Mr. J. Jackson, a Catholic chaplain, will speak in your favor. At the appropriate time, we'll let people in opposition, and would Mr. Hank Haynes open your mic. Mr. Hank Haynes is the Webster Parish Sheriff Deputy. Would you please introduce or have them introduce yourself to people in the room with you?
I'm Sheriff Jason Parker here in Webster Parish. In the room with me, I have former Sheriff Gary Sexton with me. Jimbo Yoakum represents the 26th Judicial District here in Webster Parish. Chief Deputy Hank Haynes, and also not present is Representative Wayne McMahon, who asked me to be his proxy here this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Also, we have Ms. Cynthia Gales speaking in behalf of the victim, and well, she will not be speaking, but she's here in support of the victims, and Mr. George Dosep, a victim advocate assistant, who will not be speaking. In person, we have Mr. Justin Lewis, who will be speaking, and it's Representative Robert Mills, Senator Robert Mills. And Senator, will you be speaking?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. But Senator Mills is here in support of the victim's family.
Yes.
Thank you. After all those persons have made their statement, and then we'll allow you to make a brief statement on your behalf before we vote. Do you understand the process? Do you understand the process?
Yes, I do. I do understand it.
Mr. Jody Craig, Mr. Craig, you are a second felony offender. Your offenses are second-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. You were sentenced to life, and I think those sentences running consecutively, and no, those sentences were running concurrently, and you received a commutation of sentence on January 24th, 2023. Governor Edwards signed your commutation of sentence, and it commuted your sentence to 99 years with immediate parole eligibility. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And your new parole eligibility date is January 24th, 2023. Your adjusted good time date is June 28th, 2029, and your full-term date is January 6th, 2079. Is all that information correct?
Yes, sir, I believe it is. That was all on my new master prison record.
Right, great. And your case has been assigned to Mrs. Jackson. Would you please answer Mrs. Jackson's question?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Craig. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Yes, ma'am, doing well.
Your case has been assigned to me, Mr. Craig, and I've reviewed it, so I have some things to talk to you about. You appeared before the board on May 17th of 2021, and by a 4-0 vote, the board voted to recommend a commutation to the government. I was not on that panel at the time. I had not been confirmed to the board. So I didn't have the advantage of having participated in your clemency hearing. So some of the questions I asked may have been covered in your previous hearing, but since I wasn't a part of that hearing, I may have some additional things I want to talk to you about.
All right.
How old are you, Mr. Craig?
I just turned 66 years old.
And how long have you actually been incarcerated on these charges?
Since 1979, which is working on 44 years.
So it's 43 years right now?
Yes, ma'am. I haven't completed it. 43 completed.
And so you were how old when you committed these crimes?
21 years old.
Explain to me, since I wasn't at the previous hearing, how it is that someone 21 years old is involved in this kind of criminal activity. What was going on with you at that time that brought you to this point?
Yes, ma'am. It's really, it was an irrational and immoral act. I had a serious alcohol problem at that time in my life.
Let me slow you down a little bit. Let me slow you down. How far had you gone in school? Did you have your high school diploma?
I got my GED on the streets. I went to my senior year of high school. I didn't graduate, so I got a GED later on.
And why didn't you graduate?
I was expelled from school for not giving an oral book report, and I had refused to give it. And so I was expelled, and I just never went back my senior year.
And once you were expelled from school, what did you do?
I started to work in the oil field on a workover rig.
And how long did you do that?
For a couple of years, maybe not even that long. I started spending more money.
How old were you when you started working in the oil field?
I was around 17. I was just about to turn 18.
So you were working in the oil field. And you did that for a couple of years, correct? So you're 19, maybe 20 around that time?
Yes, ma'am. I guess so, right.
Why'd you stop working in that
Well,
occupation?
like I say, I started devoting more and more of my time to where I would drink and I would smoke marijuana. And it ended up.
Why were you doing that?
Well, I worked occasionally for a contractor. I'd work a little bit and then we would quit and then I'd go back to work again. And I was just living around the house and all that. And so most of my life was devoted to partying. That was just really staying drunk and staying high most every day.
What kind of drugs were you using?
Marijuana, speed, pills, but mainly alcohol. That was what I really relied on.
So you consider that you were an alcoholic then?
Just not then, but later on, after all this, when I had hit bottom, when I encountered the Alcoholics Anonymous program, I began to realize I was an alcoholic.
So let's talk about, this crime, or these crimes. It started off at the home of Jim Rogers, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It didn't start off then. I had threw a ride in a truck that I had really stolen or just taken advantage of. I was with an associate drinking. I took the truck and I threw a ride in it, and that's how I ended up at the home of
Rogers. Did you know Mr. Rogers personally?
No, ma'am.
And what happened when you got to Mr. Rogers' house?
I believe that I had a weapon on me, and I went to their house and I was looking for a ride for them to take me somewhere, wherever I was going.
About Mississippi, you were in Texas, this is Tyler, Texas,
I was around Texas at that time.
and so you went to the Rogers home with the intent of doing what?
Well, this is what's so irrational about it. At the time when I threw a ride in the truck, I was looking for another ride. So when I ended up there at that house, I saw a man in the field that was cutting wood or something. And I went to the house. I didn't know these people. And when he pulled up, that's when I pulled the weapon on him, and I was wanting a ride, transportation from him.
Well, where were you trying to go?
Well, I really didn't know where I was wanting to go. I told them something about I was heading to Arkansas or Florida, but I was very, very intoxicated at the time.
Well, but you lived in Texas, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So why were you so desperate to get to Louisiana and then Mississippi?
Well, that's what doesn't make any sense about it. Like I say, the only thing I can say, I didn't have the soundness of mind. It was irrational.
Ask you this, did you ever indicate that, did you shoot somebody in Texas?
I think I told them that, but that was just something I had made up. Something to where it, in my mind, maybe it gave me a little bit more control over them or whatever, but I had never done anything like that.
So you force Mr. Rogers into his vehicle, and you forced him to accompany you to Louisiana. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then you arrived in Bossier City.
Yes, ma'am.
What happened in Bossier City?
We pulled into a restaurant area, and I seen some people exiting the, I believe it was called the Ravana restaurant. And I took them hostage in order to gain another ride and let Mr. Rogers left him there to go on his way.
Why did you do that?
To gain another ride, another transportation in order to go wherever I was going.
Why didn't you just continue on with Mr. Rogers?
I don't really know. I didn't. That's what happened. I let him go and got another ride.
So you drove from Tyler to Bossier?
He did the driving. He drove. Yeah, we went from Tyler to Bossier.
That's probably 2 hours or so.
Yeah, probably so.
Okay. So during that 2 hour period, you weren't kind of sobering up in?
No, ma'am.
And then you encountered this couple leaving the restaurant. What happened? What happened there?
I pulled the gun on them and told them that I needed to ride, and they complied, and we got in their vehicle and left.
Again, you still haven't figured out why you're trying to go to Mississippi? You have family in Mississippi?
I think I told somebody I may have been going to Arkansas or Mississippi. That wasn't really I didn't really know where I was going, to tell you the truth, but we headed out.
Well, it kind of troubles me that you can't provide. I mean, I understand being drunk or impaired, but, to be delusional, which is what you're having us try to believe. I'm struggling.
I know it is, you can't make any sense out of this. And all I can say is at that time in my life, which I take responsibility for all of this, and I am remorseful for what I've done with the victims and everyone else, but it was a totally irrational act. And at that time in my life, alcohol
Let me ask you this, okay?
Just
What were you,
had me really out of my mind.
what were you intoxicated on?
Oh, I started out drinking beer and whiskey and everything else. I used all of this in a combination.
Well, I understand, I'm just, having, not that I drink particularly heavy, but I am familiar with, drinking alcohol and never smoked marijuana, but, typically doesn't cause irrational behavior. And a person is more likely to fall asleep sometimes.
Well, in this case, it was not soundness of mind and it wasn't rational. If you look at all of this, none of this never should have happened. It makes no sense. It was irrational. And at that time in my life, the alcohol consumption and the other drugs that I was using placed me to where, yes, I am responsible. I made these choices. I know what I did was sinful and it was wrong. And it makes, to try to explain it to you in a rational way, it was totally irrational. It was immoral, it was wrong, it was sinful.
So
But I can't explain it in a rational manner.
After you encountered Miss Baxter and Mr. Hardaway,
Right.
you kind of took them hostage also. And again, you're telling them that you shot a man in a bar in Tyler, Texas. You didn't know if you killed the man. You did not want to go to jail and had planned to travel to Mississippi to hide out. Do you recall telling them that?
Yes, I did. And I think that was a way to gain control over them or persuade them that this was necessary in order for them to give me the ride wherever I was going.
How long do you think you rode with them after they were
Well, thinking back on it, when you're intoxicated, time is different, a different perspective, but I guess it was a couple hours, maybe longer. I don't really know.
I guess I'm struggling with the 2 hours, 2.5 hours from Tyler, and then the 2 hours to Delhi. And
We were on the interstate, so yeah.
you hadn't sobered up any, you hadn't fallen asleep. I'm struggling with that. I'm just gonna be honest with you, I'm struggling with that scenario. So you instructed Mr. Hardaway to pull the vehicle over at the Delhi exit. And you and Mr. Hardaway got out of the vehicle. You had a conversation with him, and Mr. Hardaway was shot 3 times. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Why did you kill Mr. Hardaway?
There was no reason for it.
Well, something prompted it, Mr. Craig. Something prompted it.
Well, at that time in my life, and like I've come and thought about it many times myself in self-examination, it was on my part, there was really no reason for it. And maybe at that time in my life, because of that, the essence of it the evil of the whole situation prompted me to do what I did.
Did you know Mr. Craig and Mr. Hardaway?
I had went to school with him. I didn't know that was him coming out of the restaurant whenever I approached them. I didn't know it was him, but later on, at one time in my life, we had went to school.
When did you realize that you knew Mr. Hardaway?
Oh, after they got to talking, when I was in the vehicle with him for a while, going down the road.
Now, what prompted you to ask Mr. Hardaway to pull off the highway?
What prompted me to do that? I guess I had in my mind at some point, I had come to the conclusion that I was going to shoot Michael Hardaway.
And why did you come to that conclusion?
Well, that's the question there is that there was no reason for it.
Because you informed Baxter, and Miss Baxter was a female. You informed her that you killed Mr. Hardaway because he could identify you.
I was already identified though, Ms. Chairman, because if you look at this whole case, when it started out, they already knew who I was and everything else. So I probably did tell her that, but that's not the reason why.
And then,
as I said, there was no reason for it. It never should have happened, but it did happen.
and then you continued driving.
Let me go back in my memory. I think I had her drive.
Yeah, you can remember some things, but you have really big gaps about the important things. But you all encountered a roadblock in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And that's when you were arrested. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there are mostly, I can't remember, the only thing that a lot of times respectfully with you, this whole thing was, as I said, there is no reason for it. It never should have happened, but it did happen. I'm responsible for it. I did it. But as far as intent, I never planned to do any of this, but it did happen. It was an irrational act. And the only thing, through years of self-examination in my life and coming to the conclusion with self-help programs and being, my involvement with the church, where I received my redemption and forgiveness of sin.
Mr. Craig, we're going to talk about the things you've done since the shooting, since the incident, because that's also important in our decision making. But another thing that's equally as important is whether or not person. It's one thing to say you accept responsibility. It's another thing to evade answering questions that indicate, what actually happened.
I know, and I understand that, but I'm not really evading it. I'm just trying to be honest about it. When you ask me what the reason was, I don't really know the reason. And after all these years, I still can't quite understand it, except that it was in my life at that time, it was a totally irrational act. It was sinful.
Were you
It was evil, and I did it.
Suffering from any form of mental illness? When you talk about someone being irrational and acting in a rational way, that would be indicative of some sort of mental health issue. And I don't have any indication in my record that you suffer from any diagnosed mental illness.
Well, that's true, but apparently I wasn't totally the way that I should have been at that time in my life. That's for sure. It would be indicative of that. But Ms. Jackson, if I could share with you just one moment.
Sure.
When I came here after all of this,
Mm-hmm.
I had really hit bottom. And I felt guilty about all this, not only the victims, with Michael Hardaway and Miss Baxter and my family and everyone that I had affected society. I had hit bottom. And I had to come to a conclusion to do some self-examination. And when I came to Angola, even though this is a maximum security prison, when I got involved with Alcoholics Anonymous right here, and they told me about that program, I began to understand where I had made mistakes in my life and what was going on, that I could not claim soundness of mind whenever I drank these large amounts of alcohol. And I did this crazy, bizarre stuff. And so with that, I didn't want any more trouble. I can't change the past, but I have changed the present and I want to change the future. And thank goodness, years later, after all these self-help programs, I got involved with my church too, through the Catholic Church. That's where I learned about Jesus Christ.
Mr. Craig,
I've come to know.
Mr. Craig, you will be given a chance to make a closing statement at the end of this hearing.
All right, yes, sir.
All right,
Ms.
Mr.
Jackson.
Craig, I do know that you have only had a total of 12 disciplinary write-ups in your 43 years of incarceration, which is, a really outstanding disciplinary record. I'm showing that your last disciplinary write-up was in 2002. Do you recall that incident?
I don't know which one it is. It's been so long ago, but I have had very few write-ups.
I understand, but you don't recall the very last one you got, you don't recall that.
What is the rule violation? Do you know?
I don't know that,
I've had very few.
I understand, so that should make it easier for you to remember when you've had 130 or 40 and understand why you might not be able to understand, but you've only had 12. If you don't remember what it is, that's fine, it's not.
I don't remember the last one. No, ma'am.
I'm looking at your programming, Mr. Gray. You've done Living in Balance 1 and 2, which is substance abuse, and you've had AA, NA. How long have you been affiliated with AA and NA?
Oh, well, when I first started out for well over 25 years, but when I got involved with the Catholic Church around 1995 or 96, I devoted more of my time to the church.
Okay, sir, please, I know you want to talk about all the great things you've done. I want to know what you're sitting here telling me today that these horrific crimes that were committed as a result of your intoxication and your impairment.
No, ma'am, I'm not blaming it on that. It was a very
Stop
big
talking.
influence. I'm responsible.
Stop talking. So the next question is, what have you done to address what was obviously a problem for you? And the only substance abuse programs that I see are Living in Balance and AA and NA. Now, Living in Balance has a start date and an end date. But AA and NA are open-ended. And I wish you would answer my questions directly. You will get a chance to talk about other things. But when did you first begin participating in NA and AA?
Around 1981.
And how long did that participation continue?
Until 1996.
So when did you do Living in Balance?
That had to be somewhere in the year 2000 and let's see if I go back, Living in Balance, had to be possibly 2011, something like that.
Since that time, have you been involved in any substance abuse groups or programs?
No, ma'am.
And then I see Cage or Rage, and which is an anger management course. My concern is that you've taken very few programs that are extremely good programs within the Department of Corrections. I'm not discounting the faith-based work, but that doesn't always kind of hit on the areas that you need work. And so when I looked at your record, and I've seen inmates who've been in prison as long as you have, who had no thought of ever being released, and yet they took program after program after program to help them understand themselves, why they committed the crime, and how to become a better human being without regard to whether they be released or not. And I was just struck by the fact that you did not have a lot of DOC programs. You did some faith-based programs. I don't discount those, but they don't always get to the meat of the heart of the issue. And that's my concern. So my question to you is, why haven't you taken more of the programming offered by DOC?
The answer to that question,
Victim awareness, which for a lot of offenders, that is a aha moment, a light bulb going off moment. And I don't see that you've taken victim awareness.
oh, that's an excellent program.
Take it.
Yes, I'm involved in it right now.
So you've only started taking it recently.
Right. But you know, that's correct. But I think you wanted me to answer the question of why I didn't have more programs, I believe.
Yeah.
The reason why is because whenever I got involved with the Catholic Church and encompassing all this, and I learned of Jesus Christ, a lot of these elements that are within these other programs, we had all of this. We had classes, we had all of this, and I devoted most of my life and my time to the church. And so, not discounting some of these programs are really good, but I had over 25 years or 30 years of AA until I got involved with the church. So whenever I got involved in the church, most of my life was devoted to that.
So what community service work have you done within the institution?
For community service work, I've served my Angola Catholic community as a Catholic peer minister. I've went to the cell blocks with other inmates. I've conducted classes to where I've taught Bible studies, RCIA, the entrance into the Catholic community. I've been involved in Toastmasters where we taught public speaking and we helped other inmates with leadership. I've taught some educational classes, as a tutor, to where I was involved in that, helping other inmates get their GED at one time. And just over the years, I've tried to give back to my community. I believe in service to help others to bring about a healing in order to make them better people also, if we can share our gifts to.
Well, let me ask you this, since you're in victim awareness now, but you feel like that's been covered in your religious studies, tell me and this board, in what ways have your actions impacted the lives of other people?
All my actions whenever this crime was committed.
What was the impact for
Oh, its impact was definitely bad for the victims that are concerned. I mean, the
Yeah.
impact of the trauma that I caused other people by
Tell me-
doing this.
How about this? Let's start with Mr. Rogers. How do you think your crime had impacted Mr. Rogers and his family?
Oh, I think it was very traumatic to Mr. Rogers and all with his family and what he went through with the threat that was concerned. And you know, I feel like I'm very remorseful to it. If I could talk to Mr. Rogers, I would convey that.
Okay, you talk a lot, so stop talking. Just using the word trauma doesn't really. I mean, what do you, well, first of all, let's start with his family. He's been abducted. What do you think his family was going through while he was in your control?
They probably were going through a lot of concern, fear. They were probably very emotionally overwhelmed, grief. Trying to empathize with them, I can imagine that it was, as you say, words are really inadequate, but it was trauma. It really was a very traumatic episode for them. And for that, I like to say that
What do you think
inadequate.
Rogers was thinking when you were forcing him to drive you? What do you think was going through Mr. Rogers' mind?
Well, going through his mind, I think Mr. Rogers was hoping that, that nothing would happen seriously, that he could comply with me and get over this situation, and that he was probably thinking about his family and his loved ones and just trying to get over on this, to get by, to survive. There was probably a lot going through his mind at the time. Mr. Rogers, really, I guess we talked a little bit, not to over talk, but Mr. Rogers seemed like he's a very good person. I know this was devastating, and it was something that
What do you think?
pretty bad.
What do you think the long-term effects of this crime had on him and his family?
Well, the long-term effect, I guess, yes, indeed, it was something that they talked about and they came together. They were emotionally overwhelmed, and that they gained solace, and that they
You think
something they
this-
tried to understand all this. And
Do you think this experience changed their lives in any way?
yes, I would.
How?
I think it was something that changed their life by the impact of the devastation and the trauma that it caused them, and probably brought them closer together to support each other. But at the time, it was something that caused them grief, that they had to get over.
So you think they got over it?
I wouldn't know, but I would hope so. I would hope that they would have come to terms with it some kind of way.
What about Miss Baxter?
The same thing. It was something in her life that I know caused her some emotional and traumatic impact. It hurt her immensely, and by being there, and it's probably something that she may not ever get over. But I would hope that at some point that there
What
would be.
about Mr. Hardaway? What about Mr. Hardaway when you asked him to pull off the interstate and go down this gravel road? What do you think was going through his head?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it was something that I know I would not want to be going through that. The fear and the threatened part of his life to go through this, to actually have to encounter this, and it's just something that, like you say, that they shouldn't have went through to begin with.
Yes, is it after you shot and killed Mr. Hardaway? Imagine Miss Baxter sitting in that car, hearing those shots fired, and obviously she was on a date with Mr. Hardaway, so he was someone that was important in her life. And she has to hear, if not see, him being shot multiple times, and then his killer getting back in the vehicle.
Yes, it's terrible. That's right, really is. As you say, you use the word horrific. I guess it would have been.
Yeah. And what about Mr. Hardaway's family?
Yes, ma'am. Same thing. Very, very terrible. Horrific, tragic, nonsensical. Yes, ma'am. Very much so. I can well understand that and equate with it. Just terrible.
So, you know, you've got a lot of opposition to your release. So what would you say to people who don't think you ought to be released? Why should this board this involved multiple victims who endured, you want to use the word trauma? I call it hell. Who endured hell at your hand.
Well, what I like to say to that, if I on question how I would do that, I well understand it, and like you say, hell, as you say, instead of trauma. I can't change the past. Well, I can't change that, and like I say, it was terrible. So what I would like to,
Go ahead. Go
what I
ahead.
would like to say to them is that I've tried here with the help of my Savior to become a better person, try to make understanding of this, tried to, with the victims, to empathize with them and to come to terms with trying, I know words are sometimes inadequate, but to believe that remorse that I do have and the guilt that I've shown, and to let them know that I've become a better person and I want to continue to be a better person. Not only that, but I would like to bring a healing through this to other people, also my family, my community, people that I know, in order to be honest and sincere and to do this, and not only in prison, but perhaps living a normal life in society. Because my intentions are to stay involved with the church. That's the key. That's the key to do all this too. And also, if I could, with even the victims, if they wished it, to establish dialogue with them too, if it was up to them, to where we could.
So what would you say to them? I mean, what could you possibly say to them?
Well, first of all, I would listen to them, and then I would respond and try to empathize with where they were coming from, questions that they might have, and to respond to it.
Warden, is someone with a prison in the room? Oh, Warden. Hey there, Warden Falco.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing well in yourself.
I'm good. What do you have to tell us about,
Ms. Jackson, you've been very thorough in your interview. I really don't have anything that I could add to it at this point.
well, thank you, sir. All right. Mr. Roche, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Before we go any further in this hearing, I'd like to apologize to Mr. Craig. I didn't recognize your guest at Louisiana State Penitentiary, and I will do so right now. Present at Louisiana State Penitentiary is Ms. Melinda Craig House, the assistant, and she'd like to make a statement. Ms. Gloria Besley, your a friend, Joe Bethany, a friend, Beth Craig, your sister-in-law, your brother, Tracy Craig, Chaplain William Messenger, and one of my favorite people in the world, Deacon Zeke Nola, and Deacon Zeke would like to give us a statement at the appropriate time. So, Mr. Freeman, do you have any questions?
No, sir. Ms. Jackson covered the question a lot, not so many clients.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to hear from your supporters. First of all, let's hear from Mr. Kerry Myers of the Louisiana Parole Project.
Good morning, Kerry Myers of the Louisiana Parole Project. And we're here today on behalf of Jody Craig. Jody's here today, obviously, because this board knows that he received a commendation that was signed by the governor of this sentence. Jody's been incarcerated for 44 years. As you heard it in his own words, he understands the gravity of his crime. He knows he's caused a lot of harm, but he spent those 44 years doing everything he could to be a better person. He can't ever change what he's done, as he said, but I can tell you that I know Jody personally. I was involved with Toastmasters for more than a decade with Jody. Jody was a leader. Jody was the person who constantly offered the opportunity to help other people to grow. I've watched him personally grow as a leader. I knew that he was involved in the Catholic community and know that as he went through those programs, he went through the ministry and theology program, which was an extensive multi-year program, actually on college level programming. I can tell you that Jody's character is, you can buy it just in every record and the things that he's done. Jody's character is exactly what you see. He's a humble person. He's a person who is willing and not just willing, has a deep desire to give back. He knows he can never undo the harm. The only thing he can do is to continue to give back. His disciplinary record, his work at the prison, his involvement in the community at the prison through things like Toastmasters and Big Siege, the Catholic community, simply just exemplifies that desire. We'll provide, Jody has a strong reentry plan. He's going to come to Parole Project. Once he has completed Parole Project, he's already started his IHOTS to Texas, where he'll live with his sister. Jody has a plan once he gets to Texas for further sobriety, seek out AANA, not only sponsor an NAA, but to continue working in the community with other people. So we would just ask this board to take all of this in consideration today. Grant Jody's.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Chaplain Jay Jackson.
Yeah, my name is Jay Jackson. I served as the Catholic chaplain at Angola from 2016 to 2021. And prior to that, I was a volunteer from 1999 up to 2016. And throughout the entire time, I knew Jody quite well. And when I was named full-time Catholic chaplain in Angola, I was faced with a decision to find someone who could be my right-hand man, working in that office with me day in and day out. And I wanted to have someone I could trust, someone who was dependable, someone who was honest, someone who was respected, and competent. And the person I wanted to have in that office with me day in and day out was Jody Craig, because he filled all those criteria. And more important than anything else, Jody was well respected among his peers. In other words, when someone came into that chaplain's office and needed to see or speak to me, Jody was there to take the information, and they knew when they came in to see me or see Jody, they could trust Jody. Jody was very, very confident in what he did. And I guess you might say he made me look good in some cases, because he was so well organized and wanted to make sure everything was done properly and he functionally operated well and efficient. And I can't say enough nice things about Jody. Well, like I said, I worked with him very, very closely, 5 years, day in and day out. And I'm talking about long days. And so I felt like I got an opportunity to know Jody quite well. I knew the highs and the lows, and I guarantee you there were very, very few lows in Jody's daily life. He had an outstanding attitude. He was always upbeat. He was all, like I say, very smart, very efficient. Always wanted to make sure everything worked out well. And anytime I ever asked Jody, you all above and beyond, he was always willing to do that. So I'm here to speak for Jody. I tested his character. I tested where he's progressed from 40-something years ago to the man he is today. I feel like he will be an asset to whatever community he settles in. I've had an opportunity not only to work with Jody, but I've got a chance to meet him and talk to his sister regularly, where he will be saying once he gets out, that opportunity exists. And so I feel very confident that we will help in the parole project when Jody first gets out, if that happens. And subsequently after that, we begin the same with his sister, that Jody will have all the solid support he needs to succeed. And so again, I ask you all for your favorable recommendation.
Thank you, Chaplain.
Thank you.
At this time, would Ms. Melinda Craig House keep your seat and just speak to us, give us your statement?
Good morning. Yes, sir. I'm Melinda Craig House, and I'm Jody's sister. I'm the youngest of the family. I would just like to speak in support of him today, and I would like to let you know I've been coming to Angola since I was 15 years old, and throughout the years we've been here and seen the change that Jody has made in his life. Our family would like to express our sincere sorrow, and we just pray for the victims and their families. And I'd like to say that we wouldn't be here today in support of Jody if I felt that he had not changed his heart and that he had turned his life around. I know that he had the desire and willingness to want to change, and if he could change what had happened, I know that he would. My family were able to provide a loving and stable home for Jody. Also, in the community in which we live, there are 2 well-respected leaders in our community that have offered Jody employment. We live in a community of faith-filled community who are praying for Jody, who love him and who love our family. And we're very blessed that we live in such a small community and be a part of that. And I feel like with his trustee status of over 30 years, his conduct record, and his faith ministry here at Angola, and the programs in which he's completed for over 40 years, and the many mentors that have been involved with Jody, and the many who reach out to us and have told us what an exceptional inmate and model inmate and how he gives back. Of course, we didn't ask for that. They tell us, but also we just feel that those are all examples of his changed heart in the way that he's turned his life around. And we believe that he will continue. And I feel like God has used him here, and I feel like Jody would be able to do great things if given the opportunity. And we just humbly ask that the board would be able to grant Jody's parole and early release today. And we appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mrs. House. Deacon Nolan. Deacon Nolan,
Yes, sir. Hello, Mr. Roche.
hello, Deacon Nolan.
Yes,
Would you ask your statement?
yes,
Go ahead.
Go ahead with your statement.
okay. I'm very grateful to have met Christ in Jody Craig. Each morning for many years, we have prayed together the Liturgy of the Hours, the official prayer of the Catholic Church. His transformation has been interior, made visible in his voluntary ministry and service to his fellow inmates. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deacon. Now, first of all, we'll hear from Deputy Sheriff Hank Haynes.
Good
Okay.
morning, Ken. Good
Okay.
morning,
Okay.
Jason Walker, Sheriff here in Webster Parish, along with former Sheriff Gary Sexton. Jimbo Yoakum with the DA's office here in Webster Parish. He had to step out and go to court along with Chief Deputy Hank Haynes. Not present is Wayne McMahon, our state representative. And we just, in behalf of trying to save some time, we want to let y'all know that we stand with the family in opposition of the early release. And that if we understand that in June of 2029, that his good time would be available, and we ask that the board consider waiting until that time and reevaluate at that time in 2029.
Sheriff Parker,
Yes, sir.
and everyone else in the room had to go to court, right?
Yes, sir.
At this time, we would like to hear from the nephew of the victim, Mr. Justin Lewis. Mr. Lewis?
But
Okay. Just give us your full name and your relationship to the offender.
I'm Justin Lewis, and I'm the nephew of Mike Harwood.
Okay.
Sheriffs of Richland Parish, Warren County, along with the chief of police in Vicksburg, said that he killed him because of him. The surviving victim told me last week Jody killed him because of him. Jody's family gave Mike's family full yearlings every year in the little town of Shongaloo, Louisiana. Okay, they knew each other, spent the night in the house together. He did not kill Mr. Rogers. He did not kill Miss Baxter. He killed Mike. So, during the clemency hearing, there were words used such as mercy, genetics, irrational, profound, Catholic, and AA. I've heard many of those words today. It was told by Jody Craig in the clemency hearing that alcohol had a profound effect on him and led him to make some irrational decisions. He stated that AA and the Catholic Church has helped him change. I know many people who drink and are alcoholics. It's profound in many of their lives and has made them all make irrational decisions. I don't know of any of those irrational decisions leading to burglary, robbery, kidnap, and murder. I pray that the board will use the most strenuous caution in releasing someone to a society where alcohol can be purchased on every corner to prevent more irrational decisions being made. I'm told AA is something that works well for those who follow it. Although AA is easier to follow in prison, a parole board member said that he didn't know the culture in East Texas, but he did know the culture in Louisiana. He said many people in Louisiana encourage drinking, and I completely agree. I live in Louisiana, and I'm very familiar with East Texas. It's the same culture as Louisiana. I'm glad you go to church. My son said that even agnostics, as you said you were prior to going to prison, in the Marine Corps, go to church on Sundays to avoid tearing down the whole platoon's barracks and putting them back together. The same can apply to prisoners doing hard labor. I have a heart. This gets tough, but it's been stated how well he can do in East Texas. So I apologize to everybody.
A parole board member stated that alcoholism is related to genetics during the clemency hearing. He said it was related to genetics and chemical and not just willpower. I agree with that. Science show that genetics are associated with killers and murderers. It's proven to be unequivocally clear that murderers are both born and made through their genes and environment. There's a reason I bring this up. It was mentioned by one of Jody's supporters who spoke on Jody's behalf that Jody's father was no longer living at the clemency hearing. What he didn't mention was how he died. Jody's younger brother shot and killed his father and was charged with first-degree murder. I agree that alcoholism can be one's genetics. Genetics are related to murderers also. Jody's family member commented on what they've been able to see Jody become since he's been in prison. No one will ever get to see what Mike Hardaway would become. It was highlighted in the last hearing that Jody was only 22. I want to list some of the things Mike had accomplished at 23. He was a loan officer of Indian Banking Trust. He was chairman of the JCs. I know JCs is mentioned a lot in his parole hearings, and he was up for Businessman of the Year, 23 years old. Jody said he couldn't come up with the words to describe his actions that day. I decided to help him today by reading his words describing his actions that day from the public record file in Richard Parish. You said you were in a bar that morning and got an overwhelming feeling that you needed to get out of there. It was Ricky Black's truck, by the way. You immediately walked out of the bar and stole a truck. You said you weren't in control of your actions. Later that day, after the robbery / kidnapping in Tyler, you pulled into a restaurant in Motor City and saw a young man and woman getting into the car. You pulled a gun on them and forced them to drive east towards Mississippi. You recognized the man. You began to feel very strange riding in the car. You became aware of having sexual feelings towards the woman, and you would like to have sex with her. I wonder if that's possibly a reason for killing Michael, since it wasn't because he knew. You had the man drive off a country road near Delhi. When you got out of the car to urinate, you forced the man out. When you were getting back in the car, you told the man to step back. Then you had this strange, uncontrolled feeling to shoot the man. The next thing you realized was that you shot the man. You heard the man make a noise as he fell to the ground, flopping like a chicken. I would like you to know that this wasn't the end of my Hardaway.
Mr. Lewis, address us and not.
Okay. I would like the board to know that this was not the end of Mike Hardaway. He shot him 200 feet from the highway down an old gravel road and then sped off in a car like a coward. With bullets tearing through almost all of his vital organs and shattering many bones in his body, he crawled on his hands and knees all the way to the highway, yelling for help. That's where all the scars came from on his hands that were displayed in his casket. A man named Pat Patterson, nearly 300 yards away, heard him yelling after the gunshots and went to see what the problem was. When Pat got there, Mike was dying. Before he faded away, he was able to tell him who you were and who he was, and that he had sent you. And that they were headed towards Mississippi. He began to fade as he mentioned his mom and dad being older and his dad not doing well. He died moments later. When y'all voted last time in favor of community and sentence, you told me that this wasn't a vote to turn him loose. You said you'd heard me when I spoke of how this destroyed Mike's parents. You said you hear me now when I told you Mike's daddy cried every day until he died on December the 25th, 1970. Please hear me now when I tell you that 66 years old is too young for Jody R to be released for this crime. He's still healthy enough to commit more crimes. If genetics is a concern to murder again or drink alcohol again, he might want revenge on my family for speaking the truth about him. I welcome his revenge. At 66, he'll get to be with his family. If he tries really hard, he'll get married and have kids. I was asked to make a list of family members and how they were related to Mike. I wrote it out and there was something noticeably missing. It listed Betty Lewis' sister, Reagan Hardaway, nephew, etc. There were no names listed that had wife, son, or daughter beside the name. That's a crime in itself. So remember, when they introduced me in the beginning as the victim's nephew, that Jody Craig took Mike Hardaway's opportunity for anyone ever to be introduced as my son or daughter. 66 is too young for what he took away. The way I look at this, can any of you tell me how many years is worth taking in life? Can anyone tell me 43 years is enough? Sincerely, the victim's nephew, Justice Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I think that concludes the statements from the opposition and from the support. Now, Mr. Craig, we have 3 minutes only to make a closing statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Roche and Ms. Jackson, and also the other member of the board. I'll keep it concise and short within those 3 minutes. I had actually written something out, but I had left it in the other room, so I'll use it in my own words. First of all, I'd like to extend my apologies and my remorse and my regret that all this happened to all the victims, whoever they are. I take responsibility for my actions. And like I said earlier, sometimes words are inadequate, but I want to convey that I feel this. When I came to Angola, this is a place where we come present for the negative consequences of sin in our lives. But I'd like to share one thing also. This is also a place of redemption. And I've come to know that. I've come to understand myself a lot better, come to grow, to extend this to others, to try to help them. I received forgiveness of sins and the promise of eternal life. And I thank God for that through the church, my relationship with Jesus Christ, and of course, all of the programs that help us to become better people. And all the victims of this, as I've said earlier, I extend all my remorse, all my regrets. I'm sorry. And as I said earlier, it was a totally irrational act. All of this never should have happened, but it did happen. And for that, I regret that. And, I accept responsibility. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's our closing statement.
Thank
And
you,
I
Mr.
appreciate the board. Thank you for your mercy that's been shown.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Is the panel ready to vote?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Mr. Craig, let me first thank all of our participants here today, those in person and those online. Appreciate your input. It helps inform our decisions. Mr. Craig, as I said, I was not on the panel back in 2021, but I can understand why there was a recommendation for clemency. You had done some good things. You stayed out of trouble. But I'm going to tell you that for me, I still have some concerns about you. You know, it's one thing. I listen very closely to people. I watch them. I read their expressions. I try to get a sense of who the person is. And sometimes people on the outside look pretty good. You're just looking on the outside. But you can get a sense that there's still something not ready on the inside. And that's how I feel about you today. I don't think, and maybe you're not capable of it, I don't know. But I don't really think that you truly understand just the life-changing trauma that all these victims went through. I think you've already received mercy as a result of a commutation to 99 years, which gives you a parole eligibility date in June of 2029. But I think you have more work to do, more introspection to do, Ms. Craig. When you say you want to bring healing to this family of all of these victims, there are so many victims that go beyond the immediate people involved in the incident. One way that you can bring healing to them is to show them that you're willing to serve out the remainder of your sentence until your good time eligibility date. That would show that you wanted to bring them healing. So for me, I just think you haven't taken enough programs, and I don't think the programs that you have taken have done enough to address your substance abuse issues. So my vote today would be to deny because of a lack of programming, because of a proximity to a good time release date, and your need to understand the impact of your crime.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Mr. Freeman?
Okay, Mr. Craig, I've sat here and listened very intently, and there's no doubt you've done very, very well within prison. You have very strong victim opposition. And I know you have the church, and believe me, I'm Catholic and I believe in God and all of those things, but you need classes also. I mean, you hadn't taken a class since 2017, I think it was. And I don't think you grasped what you did. And I think there was some other intent to just shoot the man, and beside, I think he might have known. So my vote today is to deny.
Mr. Craig, I've sat here and I've listened intently. It's one thing to say you're remorseful. It's another thing to show it. And you have not shown it today. You would not let Ms. Jackson, or you wouldn't answer Mrs. Jackson's questions directly. You always wanted to highlight your community service, your work. We had that information. You have not shown remorse at all towards the family. This family is still physically, mentally, and emotionally affected by this crime. It was a senseless crime. You were 21 years old, you were a grown man. You knew exactly what you were doing, or maybe you did because you were so drunk. But you had enough wit about you to steal multiple vehicles, and because someone may recognize you, you brutally murdered the individual because he might be able to recognize you. Based upon the entire legal community opposed, based on the adamant opposition from the victim's family, based upon a history of violence, proximity of your good time date, and the need for additional programming, especially in the area of substance abuse, my vote is to deny your request. You have a good day. This concludes this hearing.